Hello book lovers, and welcome to another edition of The Beauty of Books, a series dedicated to, you guessed it, books. Now, today is March 15th, the middle of March. It may be March 16th by the time you see this, but let's just say it's March 15th, the middle of March. Now, in ancient Roman culture, the middle of March was called the Ides of March. You may have heard that term before. Now, which famous Roman figure, can you think of that was assassinated on the Ides of March? If you had said Julius Caesar, you would have been correct. Julius Caesar was assassinated on March 15th, 44 BC, on his way to the Senate. Famously depicted by Julius Shakespeare in his play, The Tragedy of Julius Caesar, which is kind of why we're here today. That's going to be our subject today. Don't tell anybody. Now, March is significant because it's kind of the end of winter and the beginning of spring, and March 15th, the middle of March, would be close to the beginning of spring. Now, the Romans didn't use the word 15th for the middle of March. March 15 in Latin would be quindecim Marca, that would be the 15th of March in Latin. That would be like literally 5 days after 10, quindecim. The Romans split their months up into 3 segments. There was the calends, the nones, and the ides, the ides, or the ides. The calends, think of calendar, was the beginning of the month. The nones was from the beginning up into the ides, and then the ides was the middle of the month. Now, the origin of the word ides is not quite clear. There are guesses as to what ides means. It could mean the middle of March, a variation of the word middle, or medium in Latin. It could be a variation of the word divide. Now, my theory is a variation of the word fides. Think fidelity, which means faithful or loyal. Now, the assassins of Julius Caesar weren't really loyal to him, well, were they? No, they were loyal to the Roman Republic, though. And I think that may be why they chose the Ides of March to do their deed. So, let's go to the bookshelf and let's pick this book right here. The Tragedies by William Shakespeare. Now, William Shakespeare, of course, wrote the tragedies. And one of the tragedies was, the most famous of the tragedies was probably Romeo and Juliet. But another famous tragedy was Julius Caesar. That's what we're going to talk about today. Now, Julius Caesar, Caesar wasn't really his name, it was a title. There were many Caesars in ancient Rome, Julius Caesar being the most famous of the bunch. Caesar was an emperor, and emperors had total power, and they tended to get inebriated by their power. They got too confident, and they were infamous for being too confident, actually. And Julius Caesar's fellow politicians took notice of his increasingly crazy behavior, and they wanted to put a stop to it before he got out of control. So they decided to assassinate him. And the guy that led the conspiracy was Marcus Brutus. Now again, Brutus is more of a title than a name, and there was more than one Brutus, as we'll see later in this episode. So, shall we get to it? I'd like to show you this book. Hans will show this book for us. Are you ready, Hans?
Okay, here's our book. Here's our book, and there's Hans. Hi, Hans. There we go. Here there's the slipcase for the book. The slipcase protects books, and it does a good job of keeping the book in good condition. The Tragedies of William Shakespeare by the Heritage Press. There's our book. Now we'll take the slipcase off, slip the book out of the slipcase, and there's the book. There's the slipcase. Okay, here we go. Oh, yeah, the pages are kind of thin for an old book. It's a thicker book, so it probably has thinner pages. Yeah. And let's open the book. And see, the pages are kind of faded. Oh yeah, I can smell the kind of mold, the mildew in the pages. Like I said, the thing I like about books is when you open an old book, you're smelling history. I can smell my mom when I open these books, these old books. The Heritage Shakespeare, edited by introduction to each play and glossary by Peter Alexander. Now, Peter Alexander was a Regius Professor of English Language and Literature at the University of Glasgow. He was also a noted Shakespearean scholar. His collected works of Shakespeare are also known as the Alexander Text. So he's the guy that put this book together. Not physically, but he collected all the plays and put them together in this edition of the book. William Shakespeare, The Tragedies, with an introduction by George Reynolds. George Humphrey Wolfston Reynolds, born in 1902, died in January 1999, also known as Dady Reynolds, was a British literary scholar and theatre director. He directed and acted in many productions for the Marlowe Society and was the chairman of the Cambridge Arts Theatre from 1946 to 1942. Agnes Miller was born in 1895 and died in 1980, was an engraver and an illustrator in Britain. And she did the illustrations for this book in New York. The Heritage Press in New York was created by George Macy Companies and was active from 1932 to 1982. Story. The text of the Heritage Press. Heritage Press. It's also called the Limited Editions Club. And it was revised text copyright 1958 by William Collins Sons and Company Limited. This special edition are copyright 1959 by the George Macy Companies Incorporated. Now, George Macy was an American publisher in New York. He was born in 1900, died in 1956, and he was no relation to Rowland Hussey Macy of the Macy's department store fame. He was born in 1822 and died in 1877. He was the American businessman who founded the department store Macy's in New York. Preface to Tragedies by George Rollins. A note on the illustrations by Agnes Miller Parker. There's the preface by George Humphrey Rylance. And there's the note on illustrations by Agnes Miller Barker. Now this is kind of interesting. I want to show you this. In writing the plays of this for the living stage, Shakespeare had no thought of setting them down as a permanent record to be read as literature years later. And yet, unquestionably, more people have read Shakespeare's dramas in the intervening 3.5 centuries than ever seen on the stage. And on the title page, the sword represents violence against the crown, the sea, the uncertainty of fortune, while the comet and the storm, as an introductory plate, complete a design stemming from Copernicus' cry, "When beggars die, there are no comets seen. The heavens themselves blaze forth the death of the prince." Yeah. So there is the illustration that we just, there's the sword, the crown, and the comet. There's the illustration that we just described. And there's the sea. A little note about illustrations. Illustrations are important in books because they illustrate the story, obviously. They enhance the reader's experience. Content. So we go to the Tragedy of Julius Caesar on page 475. Let's do that. Thank you, Hans. The Tragedy of Julius Caesar. Yeah, it's probably good to take the sticky off there. You don't want to leave it on too long. There is the introduction to Julius Caesar. The introduction, of course, is by Peter Alexander, who did the introduction to all of the plays in this, each of the plays in this book. The Tragedies. Yes, the pages are kind of old and brittle. Anyway, there's the introduction. And what are you going to show us now, Hans? Let's go to the play. Shall we? Yes, we shall. Here is the scene 2, Rome, a public place. That's where enter Caesar, Antony for the chorus, Capernia, Portia, Decius, Cicero, Brutus, Cassius, and Casca, a great crowd following. Now Decius and Brutus. Now this is kind of confusing, and I'll show you why. There are two Brutuses, or Bruti, as you would say in plural. There's the Dramata Personae, the conspirators against Julius Caesar. There's Marcus Brutus, and there's Decius Brutus. Now Decius is actually only used in Shakespeare. The real person was Decimus Brutus. Marcus Brutus was the more famous of the two. He was the one that actually killed Caesar. But Decimus Brutus was one of the conspirators. And in the text, it's a little confusing to figure out who Decimus is and who Brutus is. Later on in the play, they just refer to Marcus Brutus, as Brutus. So here we go. There, Anthony Caesar says, this is where set on, leave the ceremony out. Soothsayer. Caesar! Caesar says, ha, who calls? Bid everyone noise be still, please. Now the soothsayer is, a truth-sayer, a fortune teller. And in Roman times, the soothsayer was also known as a haruspex. Haruspex could supposedly tell the future or interpret omens by looking at the liver of a sacrificed animal. Now, haruspex, of course, is spex is seeing, and haro is the liver. I hear a tongue. I hear a tongue. Cry, Caesar, speak. Caesar is turned to hear. Soothsayer, beware the Ides of March. Caesar says, beware the Ides of March. Beware. Caesar says, what man is that? Brutus says, a soothsayer, telling you to beware the Ides of March. Send him before me. Let me see his face. Fellow, come from the throng. Look upon Caesar. Caesar says, what sayest thou to me now? Speak once again. Soothsayer says, beware the Ides of March. Beware the Ides of March. He is a dreamer. Let us leave him. Pass. Senate means the trumpet sounds. Exeunt all but Brutus and Cassius. Exeunt is plural for exit. Now let's go to, this is, I'll show you a little bit about Brutus here. Act 2, Scene 1, Rome. Enter Brutus in his orchard. Now this is Marcus Brutus. And later on in this scene, the conspirators will enter. There we go. Enter the conspirators. Cassius, Casca, Decius, Cinna, Metellus, Cimber, and Trebonius. And Trebonius introduces all the conspirators. Brutus. This is Trebonius. Oh, sorry. Brutus, he is welcome hither. Cassius, this Decius Brutus. Brutus says he is welcome too. So, there you go. Marcus Brutus is welcoming Decius Brutus. I know it's confusing. So now, where are we going, Hans? This is where Caesar is slain. Paris would move, but I am constant in the North Star. O Caesar! Caesar says, hence wilt thou lift up Olympus? Decius says, great Caesar! Caesar says, doth not Brutus bootless kneel? Casca says, speak! Hands for me! They stab Caesar. Casca strikes the first. Brutus, Marcus Brutus, the last blow. And Caesar says, et tu, Bruta? And Bruta is the vocative of the word Brutus in Latin. It means calling Brutus. And you, Brutus. Then fall, Caesar. Caesar falls. Cinna, liberty. Liberty, freedom, tyranny is dead. Ding dong, Caesar's dead, Caesar's dead, Caesar's dead. So that's how they killed Caesar. They ganged up on him and they stabbed him. And I've read that also the conspirators injured themselves while they were stabbing Caesar, because there were so many of them and they did it so fast that they stabbed him and they also cut themselves accidentally. And there's the illustration. There's Brutus. There's Brutus and probably Decius Brutus or one of the other conspirators. And there you have it. There is Julius Caesar from the works of Shakespeare, the tragedies of Shakespeare. It's interesting that this is called a tragedy and not a history. I guess because Julius Caesar died. There you go. Put it back in its slipcase, and there you have it. Thank you, Hans.
That wasn't too painful, was it? I thought that was quite interesting. Thank you for joining me for another edition of The Beauty of Books, and I hope you'll come back next time.